Okay, welcome back. Yes, look, I just did want to finish off a point about slang, and then you've kind of raised it. Yeah, it feels like another language almost, doesn't it? I would say, I think there's a bit of a tendency when you're learning English, or probably any language, people put slang to one side, and they say, okay, I'm going to learn the serious part of the language, because that's what you use in professional life, and, the slang, okay, I'll learn that later, I think that's a bit of a mistake. Let's remember those statistics about how people use language every day. They speak 16,000 words a day. You probably write about 200 to 300 if you're lucky, don't you? How many words in your native language when you were working in your profession back in your native country would you write a day? Depends on your job, doesn't it? But, even as a teacher, how many words would I write? 200, 300, maybe? Emails, a bit more these days with emails. But not very many compared to the amount you speak. Now, slang is absolutely a part of that spoken category, isn't it? Your 16,000 words a day, A lot of those 16,000 words are slang. Think of it depends on the culture, but here, relationship with colleagues, even amongst professionals, there's a lot of slang that flies around the staff room. It doesn't matter where you are. Whether you're swearing at the photocopier, or talking about what you did on the weekend or whatever. It's really central to the main way we use language. The main way we use any language is speaking. 16,000 versus 200 or 300. Yeah. A fair proportion, 20% would maybe 10, 20. Hard to know. Depends on the class. As I said, working class slang is a much bigger proportion, isn't it? But even as you go up into professional life, it doesn't disappear. And unfortunately, I've lost the document years ago. But some years ago, I had a document. Somebody sat in some lectures of physics and science in Oxford or Cambridge, lectures, and written down all the slang that a lecturer used. Now, that's a fairly formal situation, but they're just using all these phrasal verbs and slang. So even in the most formal scenarios, slang creeps in. Unless you get really, really formal, the Queen cutting the ribbon or something, she's going to say, oh, this bloody nice shit, cutting the ribbon, probably not. But in most circumstances, slang is there. It doesn't go away. So my point is, it's a really fundamental part of the most fundamental use of the language, which is speaking. And if you put it to one side and say, oh, it's sort of not respectable, or it's not formal, and professionals don't do that very much, so I don't need it, I think that's a problem. If you haven't done a lot of conscious work on slang, I think it's, we've talked about all these little mini projects you need as part of your journey through English. This is very much quite a central project, is the slang project. The other reason I think you need slang is, as I said earlier, humour. If people are going to crack a joke, there's a little bit of collocational slang. You crack a joke, but you make it. Often there's slang in it. And no doubt in 2, 3, 5 years you want to be in a workplace, or if you're not working, some sort of networking, connected with people. When people are connected, they have fun, don't they? They crack little jokes, and you want to be able to get that joke. You don't want to be outside that network just because of your language. And so much humour in any language depends on that slang. And I've said before, I think the ultimate difficulty with any language is not all humour. Some of it you can get, and a lot you do get at this level now. But probably the hardest kind of part of the language is more sophisticated jokes. And we've looked at a little bit of that, like with the chaser and Gruen and so on, And I've said to you, I think that needs to be a project. That's your ultimate goal. Some of you do, and I think it's the right thing to do, have very high expectations of yourself to get to the end, the absolute end of the line with this language. I think that's a great and not unrealistic project and expectation. I think you know, you should all have that. Congratulations if you've got it. Part of that, reaching that, I mean, the thing at the end of the road, I would say, is that kind of humour. So if you do want to get there, that total gold Rolls-Royce standard, you know, that is your goal. And if you, I think you pass all the academic and professional use on your way there. It's another step again. So if you want to be able to say to yourself in, you know, 10 years or so, and it's not necessarily any longer, you can get there in that time if you have the right strategies. You know, I've mastered this language. And people who throw jokes at me, you know, or quick ideas, I get it all. Then I think that kind of stuff is a kind of a goal to have. And how do you get to a goal? You've got to practice that kind of material, don't you? Back earlier on, the simpler forms. So practice with the joke books, with the Kath and Kim, etc., etc. You're only going to get better at something if you do it, and you do a few thousand hours of it. You know? And so you've got to build a few hours in a week where you're doing that. And slang is central to that goal. So my point in brief is the most difficult and highest point of any language actually involves slang as a central part of that project. So slang is really important. It's also very nice for creative use of language. We could see, I've rubbed it off now, but even a couple of those. You get slang and think of your native language. People play with it, don't they? And it's part of your creativity with a language. There's no reason why you can't, in this language, get creative just like you're probably creative in your first language as a native. It's part of owning the new language and it becoming yours. So, yeah, lots of, I think, important things about slang. But as I say, there's this tendency to put it as a secondary kind of category and leave it. The longer you leave it, the further you get behind with it, the longer the road later. So keep working with it now. Now, what I've got here is a bit of reading that no doubt, as I said, slang is everywhere, and I think in this bit of reading we'll probably find some. When the diploma was first written, it had a higher bar. You had to get to level 4 to pass. And after the first 5 years of seeing how people were in their levels, when I rewrote it, lowered the bar to 3+. Okay, so if you do, you used to be able to, when you registered as a nurse or a teacher, you can't use ISLPR anymore for nursing, but you can for teaching. Some of you are planning to go on into educational work. Thanks. Level 4. Now, level 4, so in other words, most of the reading and most of the assessments for diploma, the formal assessments, are kind of designed at level 4. Now, so if you get 80% of the questions right, you get level 4. If you get 65%, you get a 3+. And my point is that the material that we use is kind of level 4 material. And then if you don't do perfectly, you get your 3+. Right? So, what does level 4 involve? This is the point. Level 4 involves, and it's in the diploma, in the curriculum, mastery. Mastery. So not just knowing something, but knowing it pretty well. Mastery of reading involves, the reading you will get may be just purely academic. But that's kind of easier than this sort of stuff. This is another step. And it involves exactly what I was talking about. If someone writes something and they play around a little bit with ideas, they're a little bit creative, they joke a little bit, and they play with language. Drop in a little bit of slang here and there, use a metaphor. Now you don't usually see that stuff in academic writing, as we've talked about. That's adding a little bit of richness and a little bit of complexity, isn't it? And a little bit of flavour. That stuff, level 4s should be able to deal with. Now you don't have to know and be able to deal with everything, because as I said, you get 80%, you don't have to get 100%. So you can miss 20%. Right? But you should be able to deal fairly confidently with most of it. That's a level 4. So then if you don't deal fully with it and you get your 65%, there's your 3+. But my point is this, that the kind of reading that we need to test for level 4 is not just purely academic. Purely academic has its own difficulty. It's got high-level vocabulary, some of the ideas are a bit complex, but it's fairly straight. You know, you use a word and that's what you mean and you're serious about it. Just like when you wrote your essay. You didn't play around. But there's a lot of writing. You open a newspaper, people are playing more, aren't they? We've talked about hooking people in with metaphors or trying to get people excited. There's more emotional element. And a lot of the time, writing in public life has this kind of quality. It may not be the writing you do as a professional, but it's what we often receive. If you open newspapers, magazines, etc., to get us interested, it's a mixture of information and entertainment. So it's this entertainment element that's a bit more complex. And if you think of what I was talking about people joking around, they're entertaining each other, isn't it? Language to entertain is quite complex. Humour, metaphors, idioms, often creatively changed a little bit. So that's the sort of stuff that we'll be using to test your reading. So in other words, it's testing not just your academic reading, it's testing these broader things, including some slang, including your idea to figure out what metaphor might be used, etc. All right? So what you usually find with this kind of writing is, in the middle of it, not physically, but metaphorically, in the middle there's a serious point that's being made. And maybe a half to 2/3 is kind of serious. But the rest is a bit of playing around in some way. And that's what you've got to be able to deal with. So, here's an example. And it's Phillip Adams again. And a clue. A lot of these, not, you know, it's quite common that Phillip Adams is used for assessment. We use other writers as well, but he's certainly in there. And if you look at the Moodle, good practice, that first link, I couldn't get it working today, it's your second link there, under reading. One of the best things you can do to practice for your reading, that will probably start in about a couple of weeks, we'll have our first real reading assessment, is Phillip Adams. And let's have a look at it will link to the Weekend Australian. I've mentioned before, he's a regular writer for the Weekend Australian. And here we see his articles. He's written on Malcolm Turnbull there. Let's just have a look at his first comment. I haven't read it. But Malcolm Turnbull is the Arnold Schwarzenegger of Aussie politics. You know Arnold? Terminator?
Yeah.
Yep. I'll be back. Yeah. So that's the whole idea, isn't it? It's quite clever. There's Malcolm Turnbull, I'll be back. Yeah. So there's a kind of serious point there, but he's already, right in the title, he's playing around, isn't he? So I haven't read it. That could be an interesting piece to look at. But you'll find, my suggestion is that you work your way through some of these. What you'll find is, actually it's looking good, like good news. There's about 10 of them there. See these ones over here with that little gold thing? I don't know what it is. It's maybe a dollar note or something. If you click on that, Rupert Murdoch says, "Give me your credit card details, please." You have to pay. And And look, even about 2 months ago, most of Phillip Adams had these little things on them, but they've obviously changed their policy, which is quite nice, and they've opened them up and you can get them free. And by the look of it, you go about the last 10 weeks, and yeah, that one's very recent, and obviously next week there'll be another one. So what we're going to do today is look at one that's quite much older. It comes from 2011. We've got it here. And we're going to do a practice. So, I'm going to just throw it open to you now to have a read of it. What you'll do is we'll try and do a kind of reproduction of the conditions. So, you're going to have a quarter of an hour just to read it. No questions. A little bit like the listening, you know, how you just listen the first time, you don't know what the questions will be. Alright, so you've got 15 minutes there. You can make any kind of marks on this you want to. You can underline, write notes. No dictionaries of any kind, no phones. This is not an assessment, alright? We're going to talk about this together as a group. We're going to work our way through it as a group. Alright, so underline, write your ideas. What you will get, you will always get a question on the gist, what's the whole meaning, you know. Then you get some questions on specific information, and then there will be a couple or more questions about vocabulary that we expect you not to know. But your job is to guess what you think it means. We're only going to put words in that we have worked out that, you know, we sort of imagine we didn't know the word, and you can guess from the sentence or from its part of speech or other clues what it means, all right? So work your way through thinking about gist, key points that he's making, what is he meaning here, but also vocabulary. Try to guess it as well. The best strategy is this: read the thing quickly first, once through, always with every text you get. Read it very quickly, only understand 30-40%, doesn't matter, but you'll get an overall picture of what the topic is, what overall he thinks. Then go back and you'll find when you work your way through, you'll guess it much better because you've got the broad picture. So just try that now, like about 2 minutes. Just read the whole thing through quickly. Don't stop and try to think about new words too much. You'll get an overall view. Then come back. So we'll go a quarter of an hour from now.